Good evening. Welcome to Carol's Books and Storytime. Now, the story I'm going to tell you tonight, or rather read to you from my book, which is about to be published, is a story about my father when he was a young teenager out in New Zealand. And he'd been sent out to New Zealand as part of the fund for rehabilitating young men, the sons of sailors in the British Navy. And it's called South Island. Arthur stood on the wooden porch of the traditional colonial farmhouse, twisting his brown felt hat in his hands, his battered suitcase at his feet. His green eyes took in the peeling paint and the unkept appearance of the facade of the house. "Needs a good lick of paint," he said quietly to himself. "The vegetable garden looks as if it needs a good weed as well." His back was to the farmhouse door, and his gaze swept out over the farmyard and beyond to the mighty southern Alps, with their snow-capped peaks and the undulating fields of the Canterbury Plains. It had been a long journey down from Bulls in North Island to this farm in the South Island, and he was tired. But something did not sit right with him. This farm did not give him good vibes. And he, Arthur, had the gift of discerning things. His sensitive nature quickly assessed situations, and he often had premonitions of things that were going to happen. He had one of these now. This place did not appeal to him, but he would stick it out. He needed the job. A tall man in his late 30s came to the door and raked Arthur from head to toe with ice blue eyes. "You the new farmhand from Bulls?" he drawled in a heavy accent that Arthur could not place. He knew, though, that although the English was perfect and had a New Zealand twang to it, it still had the undertones of another accent, a continental accent. "Yes, sir, I am," replied Arthur, politely holding out his hand. "Arthur Farrow, sir." The man ignored it and continued to wipe his hands on his dungarees. "You a Pom? Answer me, boy. You a Pom?" Arthur felt the hairs on the back of his head rise up in warning. "I don't know what you mean, sir," he said evenly. "I'm Arthur Farrow from Flock House. I believe you're expecting me." "You from Great Britain? One of those British Navy boys? The ones to whom we farmers owe such a debt?" And he laughed derisively and spat onto the grass. "Yes, sir, I am, but you know that." "Do not backchat me, young man," he snapped. "I mean, you came out here to New Zealand because you came here to Bulls. You was deported, and if you was deported, then you must be a prisoner of His Majesty out here to reform." Arthur sucked in his breath and thought about his answer. "No, sir, I'm not a prisoner of His Majesty. My father was a sailor in His Majesty's Navy. I came out to Flock House under the scheme for Sons of the Royal Navy." The man cleared his throat and spat into the rose bushes that straggled by the porch. "You're a Pom," he said firmly. "I will call you Pom Farrow. Do you hear me? P-O-M. You are a deportee, and all deportees are a bad lot." Arthur felt his temper rise, but he managed to speak civilly to the man. "And who am I addressing, sir?" he said calmly. "The owner of this place, Mr. Fox, to you, young man." "Well, Mr. Fox, where is it you would like me to live?" "In the batch down by the stream," replied the man shortly. "At meal times you'll come to the kitchen door and collect your food and eat it where you like. I don't care, as long as you do your work well and do as you're told, then all will be well." Arthur picked up his case and walked across the farmyard towards the small shed by the stream. Inside was a bed with a lumpy mattress and a few unwashed woolen blankets. Nails were tapped into the wooden walls to provide hanging for his clothes. Arthur soon discovered that there were only 2 of them to run the farm and do all the work. 3 when the boss decided to get out of his bed in the morning. He worked long and hard. The pay was poor, as was the food. The farmer kept them on a starvation diet. Arthur endured the bad treatment and terrible conditions for several months, not willing to give in, but trying all the time to make a good impression upon Mr. Fox. He needed this job, even if it only paid a shilling a week. New Zealand, like the rest of the world, was undergoing a recession. New Zealand-born boys could not get jobs, and he, Arthur Farrow, was lucky to get this one, or at least that's what he tried to tell himself. Some months later, Mr. Edward Fox bought a second-hand Fordson Major tractor with a plough rack behind it. Arthur was used to driving the tractors at Bulls, but preferred ploughing with the gentle giants, the farm horses. Mr. Fox came out early one morning and called Arthur to him. "It's your job to plough the backfield," he said tersely, "right to the edges." "I'll hitch up the horses," Arthur replied. "Not the horses," replied the farmer, "the tractor." "But that field's nearly an 80-degree incline," Arthur protested. "It's dangerous. It'd be far easier to plough it with the horses." "I said you plough it with the tractor," replied the man, a hint of anger in his voice. "Am I the boss or am I not the boss?" "You are the boss, sir." "Right then, get on with it." Arthur hitched up the plough to the tractor and locked it in place. Lifting the plough shovels high and locking them in place with the lever, he swung the crank handle. The engine spluttered into life, and he climbed into the white driver's seat of the Fordson. Letting off the brake, he put his foot on the clutch, double-declutched it, and set off down the road to the field that needed ploughing. He was doubtful about ploughing it with the tractor, but he had to do as he was told, otherwise he'd lose his job on the farm. On reaching the designated field, he set his sights on a tree that stood at the summit of the incline, lined it up, lowered the ploughing gear, and set off. The Fordson dug its triangular spikes into the earth and chugged its way up the hill, dragging the plough behind it. On reaching the top, Arthur looked back and saw four perfect furrows, freshly cut into the turf. Deftly, he turned the tractor and put the Fordson into the lowest gear it was capable of and set off down the hill, keeping the tree in his sights. He ploughed slowly, taking his time. The engine strained. There was a bang. Arthur slammed his foot on the brakes. Nothing happened. He tried to change gear by double declutching, but nothing happened. By now the tractor was freewheeling down the sharp incline. Arthur fought to control the headlong flight of the machine, but to no avail. Grimly he hung on, trying to steer the beast on a zigzag course, but it would have none of it. Gathering speed, it hurtled towards the hedge, the plough clattering after it. "Help me!" shrieked Arthur as the tractor bumped down the incline. Then came a crash as the tractor hit a tree stump and turned over, pinning Arthur firmly underneath it. The plough slammed into the machine, creating a jumbled heap of twisted metal. Arthur lay quietly for a few minutes and started to shake with shock. "Think, boy, think," he said to himself. "How are you going to get yourself out of this one?" Quietly he took stock, checked his extremities. They were all working. He could wiggle them. He was conscious. "Good job the earth is soft hereabouts," he said to himself. He remembered the incident involving a boy at Flock House who had not made it in a similar incident. Arthur's instinct, in spite of his protestance to Vernon, had, when faced with a similar situation, been the same. He had not jumped. But unlike George, he was still conscious and he was alive, a miracle in itself. But how to get out from underneath the beast? The field was on the far side of the farm, and the farmer would only care about the loss of the tractor and berate him for not doing his job. He was stuck. No amount of shouting would bring him aid. His thoughts went back to Bess and her owner. What was it the soldier had said? Allah had looked after him on the battlefield. Allah was God. Well, if that was the case, then he, Arthur, would have to ask God to help him out of this predicament. He looked up at the sky, which was a deep blue with clouds floating by. One cloud looked very much like an angel, a huge white angel with outstretched wings. Was this a sign, he wondered? Arthur cried out, "Oh God, if you're there, please rescue me." Suddenly the plough moved to one side. Then the tractor started to move, as if it was being hauled by a giant of a man. Slowly it lifted off his body and bounced back onto its four wheels. He was free. Arthur was free. Quickly he scrambled to his feet, looked around him, but no one was there. He stared and stared at the crumpled machine. It was a miracle. Only a team of horses or men working as one could have lifted that weight off him. He knew that something miraculous had taken place. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," he shouted to the retreating cloud angel. The clouds above him parted for a second, and a beam of sunlight shone down through a hole shaped like a heart.